The Business of Agriculture podcast is brought to you by the Georgia Agricultural Commodity Commission for Milk. Did you know it takes 7 cups of broccoli to get the same calcium as 8 ounces of milk?
Greetings. Hey, thanks for joining us here on the Business of Agriculture podcast. It's me, your host, Damian Mason, but you knew that because it said so in the introduction. We got a great show for you today because we're talking about a product of agriculture that you probably don't think a lot of, but you probably enjoy a great deal. At least if you're like me, we're talking about one of the ingredients in one of my favorite products of all time, of course, the Coors Banquet. I'm talking about hops today. We're talking about the production of hops. We're talking to the executive director of Hop Growers of America. Her name is Ann George, and we're talking to a hop producer out of Idaho. Her name is Michelle Gooding. We're going to get right into them, but before we do so, I want to remind you that this episode of the Business of Agriculture is brought to you by my good friends at Harvest Profit. Nick Horeb started this company because he thought there needed to be a better software solution for people in the business of agriculture, a software solution to help you manage your inputs, your outputs, your flows, the inventory, your farms, everything you have, the millions of dollars in your operation that need to be managed with a software solution that will help you be more profitable. Check out harvestprofit.com for your free trial of their software. Okay, Ann George, Executive Director of Hop Growers of America. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Damian. How are you?
I'm amazing. Thanks for being on the podcast. And then Michelle Gooding of Gooding Farms. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so the way this came about, dear viewer and listener, and I said viewer because do not forget that this episode, like all of them for the last year, is not just an audio, it's also a video. That's right. Go to the Damian Mason channel on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, type in Damian Mason channel, and you can see as well as hear the Business of Agriculture podcast. So if you're not watching right now, Ann has as her backdrop a bunch of hop fields, and then Michelle is sitting in her office there in Idaho at her farm office. And the way this came about, on January 21st, I'm going to be the keynote speaker for a virtual meeting for the Hop Growers of America. I had my setup call with Ann, and I said, you know what, can we please do a podcast because this is a fascinating business. So on January 21st, I'm going to be speaking to this organization. And I thought, man, let's share this with all my viewers and listeners. All right, Ann, real quickly, give me the quick and dirty on Hop Growers of America.
Good morning. So Hop Growers of America has been in existence since about the mid-1950s and has worked over that period of time to help promote the different programs that are to benefit hop growers in the United States and also internationally. We have a number of different programs, our promotion or foreign market development program. We have a best practices food safety program. We've got a plant protection program whereby we seek internationally harmonized MRLs, maximum residue levels, for the plant protection products that are used for hops. And that's very important because we export about 60% of our crop on an annual basis. And then we also participate in the International Hop Growers Organization on behalf of the U.S. hop industry. We do some congressional work and try to represent our growers in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere on issues that are important to hop growers. So it's a pretty robust program, and we've got excellent growers on our board of directors representing the hop industry from across the United States.
All right, so this is fascinating to me, and all of my beer drinking friends are going to enjoy this, as well as all of the people in agriculture that are, hog farmers in Iowa or cranberry producers in Massachusetts are going to be like, wow, I didn't know that much about this. You told me when we had our planning call some quick numbers about hops, and I think it's also important, the very number one rule, tell the listener about hop versus hops, and that way we can start with that.
So producers in the Pacific Northwest, where about 98% of the crop is grown in the U.S., refer to hop production in a singular form. It would be just like potatoes. I am a potato grower, I grow potatoes. I am a hop grower, I grow hops. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about being a hops grower or this is the hops industry. And the Pacific Northwest growers really don't utilize that vernacular. It's the hop industry, we produce hops. So we do grow, as I mentioned, about 98% of the US crop here in the Pacific Northwest. This has been the major production region in the US since the early 1900s. And we produce about 40% of the world's supply, a little over 40% in a normal year. And like I mentioned, about 60% of that is exported to between 60 and 70 different customer countries worldwide. Hops are produced in exportable quantities in only about a dozen different countries around the world. And that has to do with the fact that it's a very day length dependent crop. So you will find hops produced around the world in the same basic latitudinal band as you would find wine grapes produced. So the closer to the 45th parallel, the higher the yields. So that tends to be where the hop production regions are in the northern and southern hemisphere. Hops, as I mentioned, are very day length dependent. When your lengthening day kicks over to become a shortening day at the summer solstice, the stronger that signal to the plant, the heavier the bloom set. So by being close to that 45th parallel, that is the location on the planet where you see that strongest signal, that strongest daylight signal to the plant as we switch over from lengthening days to shortening days. So once you've hit that bloom set, then that determines your yield for that particular crop. And to give you a little bit of an idea of just how dramatic that can be, in the Pacific Northwest, the average yield runs about 1,900 to 2,000 pounds to the acre of dried 10% moisture hop cones. When you go down, let's just say to the San Diego area, we have some growers that produce small quantities in that region for local breweries, and a lot of those growers sell to the brewers wet hop cones. And so I think a lot of people are familiar with fresh hopped beers that may be available at harvest time. Those are actually the wet 70% moisture hop cones that would be harvested and go into brewing before they're actually dried and baled and go into the normal sales channels that most of our growers utilize. So again, keep in mind about 2,000 pounds to the acre of 10% moisture hops at the 45th parallel or close to it, let's just say 35 to 55, versus San Diego. One of my growers indicated that he gets about 400 pounds to the acre wet. So okay, that would be about 100 pounds to the acre dry.
There you go. That's what, by the way, I know that I always have to rein in people like Ann because she knows so much about the hops industry that she probably lost a few of our people. Let's go through those numbers. And I want to talk to Michelle. 60% of the United States crop is exported. We have about 60 to 70 countries that are our customers. You
Right.
told me that Germany is the second biggest producer in the world behind the United
That's
States.
correct.
You said that the United States grows about 40% of the globe's hops are grown right here. And what's interesting is while there's somebody like a friend of mine say, well, isn't Michigan a big producer? As you pointed out, there's like 900 acres in all of Michigan compared to the Pacific Northwest, meaning Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, which grow 98% of the U.S. crop. You talked about then the acreage, the yield per acre. 2,000 pounds per acre is the average up in the Pacific Northwest, and that's of a dry product, meaning of about 10% moisture, as opposed to the specialty niche producer you mentioned in Southern California. They get 400 pounds per acre of wet, which would equate to only 100 acres dry. So you're talking about an amazing amount of difference in terms of productivity from where they are to up where Michelle is. Those are the right numbers, right?
Correct. And one of the things that we've seen quite a bit of research, because there are southern tier farmers who are very interested in producing hops, there's actually quite a large research program at University of Florida right now where they're attempting to grow hops under grow lights. And that's actually been one of the production regimens in South Africa for many years, because that's really been the one historic growing region of the world where we have seen hops produced at closer to 30 degrees latitude as opposed to the 35 to 55 range. And so adding those grow lights has allowed those South African producers to see something closer to a normal crop. And that's what Florida is now experimenting with in their research.
They're doing that indoors, or they're trying to do this outdoors under lights?
They're doing it both ways, but they do have about a 10-acre hop yard that they have set up under grow lights, from what I understand.
All right. We've talked for a long while now, and we haven't heard from our girl, Michelle. Michelle Gooding Farms, Idaho. Welcome to the Business of Agriculture.
Oh, thank you.
And also, give me some scoop. You're a 31-year-old woman. You are in the business of agriculture. Background.
Yeah, so I grew up on the farm. I'm actually a sixth generation hop grower. So we started growing hops in 1895 in the Willamette Valley, actually in Oregon. And then we moved to Idaho in the mid 40s and have been here since. My dad is starting to really enter retirement. And I have two sisters who help run the farm with me alongside our farm manager. And we have a great staff here. So, yeah, we definitely have been in the business for a while. Sure, I can give you all the numbers dating back from the highs and lows. The hop market historically is a little bit like a roller coaster. So we're really fortunate to have weathered some of those pretty significant storms. And I don't know, I'm really excited to carry on the family legacy. Right now we farm about 1,000 acres of hops.
Okay, that's the big. See, remember, my ag people, they love production. And I tell them all the time. Sometimes they love production more than they do promotion. They all do, and so I'm like, you love growing it. Remember, we got to sell this stuff. So we get into. Let's talk about the production. You have 1,000 acres of hops. What else do you have on your farming operation?
So we are actually implementing a regenerative agriculture approach on our farm. So we have started bringing animals back to the farm. We have about 150 head of cattle. We've got close to 200 ewes, and then we have about 200 laying hens on our farm.
For the person that doesn't know, because a friend of mine in Evanston, Illinois probably knows this, when you said ewes, you don't mean Y-O-U, you mean
EWES.
Which
so
means
sheep.
female sheep. Okay, so you've got 200 sheep, mother sheep, female sheep ewes. You got 150 cattle, and you got chickens. Tell me about their application.
So what we're trying to do, and we'll probably get into this in a little bit, is we're trying to minimize our costs. So we've grown hops for a long time. We're trying to do it more efficiently. And based on international shipping and MRLs, harmonization, we're basically trying to make it so we can be as flexible with the crop that we grow and also grow it still at a very high quality, but do it maybe at not as expensive as a rate synthetically.
Okay, so you're using the animals to do pest control. You're using the animals to do vegetation control. You're using them as a source of revenue, selling calves and eggs. And tell me the whole idea here.
Yeah, pretty much. That's everything. You summarized it well. Yeah, and we're trying to make it a full circle self-sustaining system. That's really our goal. You know, we've got a little farmers market too that we opened last year. So we're trying to, while hops is our bread and butter, that is the thing that pays the bills. We're trying to diversify ourselves and do that as best as we can.
1,000 acres of hops. What else do you have at Gooding Farms?
So we've got about 300 acres of pasture, and then we do some row cropping, about 50 acres of that, not tons of that. When the hop market was very bad, that's actually how my dad got through everything. He had a few acres of hops, but he predominantly row cropped to make ends meet.
Okay. So this is not a small operation. You and two of your siblings, as well as your father who's phasing out, just for the fun of it, because my Midwestern people are saying, wait a minute, 1,000 acres of corn and soybeans, that's still, I have a job in town and my wife works because that's not enough for all of us. But 1,000 acres of hops obviously is a much different revenue stream. Would you mind telling me, like in a year like 2020, what does a revenue picture look like for 1,000 acres of hops?
Well, 2020, there's a little asterisk, planted there, I would say next to it. But for us, we're, as far as budget wise, we're operating on about a $10 to $11 million budget is really what we're doing. And, you really hope that you can have your ends meet and things will work out good. That's part of farming. And we saw some challenges this year with weather as well as COVID, that we were down, I would say about 10% versus projected, but then we were able to make ends somewhat meet, thanks to Anne's hard work with the CFAP too. So hops were included in that. And then also September 9th, there was a 8 or 10 hour, 30 to 50 mile an hour windstorm. that Idaho endured. So we have some insurance claims related to that because we self-insure our crop.
Oh, you self-insure. Okay, so real quickly for the listener or viewer that doesn't know, CFAP2 meant Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, and there was monies thrown at agriculture, right or wrong, but there was money thrown at a lot of different things through all of the federal stimulus and whatnot in 2020. So, dear listener, if you're wondering what she's talking about, the federal government gave money to farmers, and you can disagree with that as well you may, but remember, it's because we need to keep these people in business so that we have food and beverage. $10 to $11 million in a normal year. And then again, my friends in Indiana are saying, good God, $10 million off of 1,000 acres. Of course, you've also got the regenerative stuff going with the livestock, et cetera, which is starting to, I'm sure, ramp up. You got a high cost business. Yes. And Ann talked a little bit about this. So let's go back to Ann. Tell me about some of the expenses that your members in the Hop Growers of America. First off, it's labor intensive, right? Is that the first one, the biggest expense for these farmers?
Yes, labor intensive. So labor costs are very high. The next category would probably be plant protection. It's a very long season crop. The hop rhizome system or rootstock is a perennial, but the big vines that you see behind me going up to an 18-foot trellis are annual, and those begin to emerge in March. Generally, the crop-bearing vines would emerge along about mid-April, and so it's full-on plant protection from that point in time until harvest in September through early October.
Let's get real quickly. Remember, we got folks that we try to always be educational here on the Business of Agriculture. Right. So somebody that says, I'm a little bit familiar, they're essentially, and if you're not able to watch, but you're listening, a hop field looks like an overgrown vineyard in some regards, yes. Right? You've got this trellis system, but what you just said was the roots, the rhizomes, for those of you that are not plant and botany type people, that's the thing that's in the ground. And then the vine comes off of that. You said one of them is a perennial, which means it's there every year. And then the part that goes up the trellis is an annual. That's the part that gets harvested every year, correct?
Correct. And that whole entire vine, and it is a vine, not a vine, due to the structure of it.
Spell it, because people are saying, what?
It's B as in boy, vine, B-I-N-E. So that entire vine, that 18 plus foot long piece of plant that comes up out of the soil every year, is cut down at harvest. And then generally the most common harvesting facility for hop industry in the Pacific Northwest is a stationary picking machine. So that entire vine is hauled into a stationary picking machine where all of the cones, which are the flowers, and all of these vines are female. The crop is born on the female plant. So if we end up with male plants in the field through random pollination and seed drop, those are rogued out. So we don't want seeds in the cones. That increases weight and decreases the quality of the cones or the flowers of the plant. And the cone or the flower is the crop that we're growing. So the leaves and the cones are stripped from those big vines and then separated so that the ultimate crop that we're marketing is 99.9% pure hop cones without any stems or leaves in that. So within that, growing that 18 to 20 foot long vine every year, first of all, you've got the trellis structure. So for a grower to go to a new piece of ground and establish a hop field, which would include building the trellis, establishing the drip irrigation system, the pumping station, and so on, and then buying the planting stock, because these are either planted from other rhizomes or from potted plants that come from a virus-free propagation program. They are not planted from seeds. You plant seeds, you get 50% males roughly. We don't want males, we only want females. So they're vegetatively propagated plants. So just the mere establishment of a hop yard is an $8,000 to $10,000 an acre venture.
Not counting the price of land, and with that,
not counting the price of land and not counting the production costs for that first year of production on that. That's just buying the poles, buying the wire, the labor to put the structure up, buying the rhizomes, planting them, or the potted plants, and setting up the irrigation system.
Okay, so
you've got
8 to 10 grand per
right,
acre just to get
per acre.
Just the thing rolling, and that does not
Right.
count any of your return on labor, nor does it count any of your cost of
No.
acre of the actual land. Okay.
No, and it also doesn't include your harvesting facility. And so every one of these growers, so to put this in perspective, Michelle mentioned they have 1,000 acres of hops. Michelle is a spot on average sized hop grower in the Pacific Northwest. Our average hop grower, and there are about 80 hop growers in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. The average hop grower is 1,000 acres. We've got them running basically from 500 acres up to about 4,000 acres of hops. And they, are obviously diversified with some other crops as well. So with this hop production unit has to have a harvesting facility. So, many of your listeners may be familiar with the cost of a new grain combine, and those certainly aren't cheap anymore. But Michelle not only has to have a stationary combine or picking machine, but then she also has to have a kiln because, as we mentioned earlier in the broadcast, we're going to dry all these cones from 70% moisture down to 10% moisture. And then she has to have a baling system. We then compress those dried hop cones into a 200-pound bale and wrap those with a burlap or with a polycloth burlap. And then that's how they leave Michelle's farm to go to the cold storage facility. All of these hops are then stored at 30 degrees or less Fahrenheit until they go into processing into pellets or extract. And then that end product, the pellets, extract, or other downstream products are also held in cold storage. So there's a lot of expense in cold storage, warehousing, and then just the picking facility for an average hop farm. If you had to go in and rebuild a picking facility today from scratch, you would be looking at probably $10 million, $5 to $10 million. And you use that facility for 30 to 45 days a year.
Okay.
A small picking facility for our Pacific Northwest growers would be a $5 to $6 million investment. So.
All right. Now, Michelle, you just gave a bunch of people sticker shock. Ann just gave a bunch of people sticker shock. So let's talk a little bit about what happens there at Gooding Farms. You're the average Pacific Northwest size. She says there's 80 producers in those 3 states averaging 1,000 acres. We have 80,000 acres. We're all of us that love beer are dependent on those 80,000 acres. We're depending on people like you. You have
60,000 acres, Damian. 60,000 acres in the U.S.
Okay, about 60,000 in all of the U.S.
In all the U.S.
Okay, and obviously most all of that, principally 98% of that is in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest.
Yes.
Okay, 60,000 acres. You've got this massive amount of stuff going on. So let's start in the spring. Kind of just walk me through this because I think that everybody wants to know what happens. Start with your season.
Yeah, so we'll just start in January.
All right.
That's got banking taxes right now, and we are doing a lot of maintenance. Historically, in the past few years, we've been putting up new trellis. So what Ann was talking about, if the weather cooperated. And then we'll roll into the end of January, February, we will be digging roots. So we'll dig those rhizomes if we're going to self-propagate fields for new acres.
I mean, you're trying to expand acres. So the new trellises and the rhizome would be, we're going to go put in 50 more acres or something, right?
Yeah, or rotate out some old fields. I mean, the thing is, this trellis is a huge investment, but it lasts for a significant amount of time. So we've got some old fields, we're rotating out some trellis, doing some repairs and maintenance. Improving them, maybe shifting the field 3 feet one way or something like that. So that all happens in the spring. We also, in the springtime, we use the H2A program. So our workers will arrive in February and we will be essentially planting new fields. We will start to, as the hops begin to emerge, we will start to potentially prune them depending on the variety. We'll plant cover crops. That's something that a lot of farms do, is plant cover crops in the springtime, depending, on the weather, very weather dependent. And then we will start to roll into the busy season. So April through, I would say, the end of September, it's pedal to the metal. You're really trying to time these things to where you put your string in. So you restring every year. You're stringing that 18-foot hop vine every single year. And that's a huge labor investment because It's something that's not automated and it's done by hand. And they're working on automating that potentially. But
that happens during what time of year, Michelle?
Typically that's April.
Okay, so in April, what you're saying is you said restringing. So we've got this trellis system. Are we talking about taking the vine and attaching it to that string so it can climb? Is that what's happening?
So that's called training. So you have to have the string there first to train. And the hops have kind of a little prickle similar to a raspberry. So when you train them, that prickle essentially sticks to the twine fairly well. And then they'll start to grow. So for most people that probably don't know, the majority of US hops are grown, I would say, in the Yakima Valley. So down here in Southwest Idaho, we're a little bit more south. So we have to be very cognizant of the timing of when we train things, because hops grow based on day length. And that's why they do really well, right? In the Pacific Northwest, we've got these long summer days. So what we're trying to do is time it so that if maybe we get a cold snap in June, it's not thinking, oh crap, I'm near harvest. I got to bloom right now. The days are, they're getting shorter. So that's something that we have to be really careful about. And we train, and then it's really simple. You just grow them, right? So you just spray, you fertilize, water, and that's spraying is, as Ann mentioned, that is a very significant cost for growers. We fight two-spotted spider mites, downy, and powdery mildew are, I would say, our main three things that we combat with spraying. And
you spray that aerially, or are you spraying that because you got a 20-foot tall plant? Are you going over that with an aerial application of a crop duster?
So it kind of depends. It depends on the label, I would say, first of all. And then second of all, you're really wanting coverage. So if you're spraying a two-spotted spider mite, you want to really get that vine covered, right? So we use, a lot of people will use Rear's air blast sprayer, similar to that they use in tree fruit. Or there's like the electrostatic versions. So typically it's sprayed from the ground up.
Okay.
And then they will do foliar applications through the airplanes. I think a lot of people are getting more kind of into that. But they haven't really tried, I don't think, any drone, anything like that.
Okay, so wait a minute now. We recognize all manner of agriculture. You just talked about mites and some things and funguses that you deal with, and the need to spray. Can you grow hops organically? I assume you can, but I'm sure the yield cut has to be significant based on what you described. Maybe Ann can take that one.
Yeah.
Ann?
So on average, I would guess that the organic production yield is about 60 to 70% of a conventional yield.
Okay.
And of course, as we all know, organic does not mean that it has not been treated with pesticides. It's just treated with organically approved pesticides. So instead of being able to use some of the conventional products that might have a longer residual, where we could potentially spray every 14 to 21 days, with an organic system, of course, you're having to go in and spray maybe every 3 to 5 days and continue to stay on top of those pests. And one of the downsides of having to spray more often with hops is the fact that as you can imagine with a Rear's type air blast sprayer, there's a lot of air damage to the plant. And so every time you go through the field and have to use an air blast application, you're going to damage part of the crop. So that's also part of what takes that yield down on an organic system. But we do have a very robust organic production sector of our industry. It's not huge, but it is growing. And I think we do have customers who are starting to appreciate the additional costs associated with organic production and are willing to pay for that if indeed that's the type of product that they want.
Fantastic. So real quickly, and we're going to go back to Michelle. I love this discussion. And yes, this is going to be a longer episode of the Business of Agriculture because it is amazing coverage. Before we ask the next couple of questions of Ann George, I want to remind you that this episode of the Business of Agriculture is brought to you by my good friends at Harvest Profit. Harvest Profit is a Fargo-based software company, but it doesn't matter where they are because they can serve you anywhere. They're in 22 states. Growers, agricultural enterprises in like 24 states and 4 provinces are using Harvest Profit. Go to harvestprofit.com for your free 14-day trial. First off, dear listener, viewer, you heard something very valuable right there. Just because something is labeled organic or says it's organic does not mean that it does not use organically approved pesticides and herbicides. You can still use chemicals in organic production. You also heard that we're going through there a lot more when we grow them organically, because you don't have the residual of the products used, and then you are damaging the plant more. About 1/3 less yield on an organic operation. How many acres do you suppose of the 60,000 acres in the United States are organic hops?
I would guess roughly 1,000.
Okay, so a few percent. Okay, Michelle, take me to summer. So we're doing a lot of work in the spring. We got a lot of laborers. You mentioned the H-2A program. For a person that doesn't understand that, that is.
So it's a worker visa program that allows them to come and fill essentially jobs that can't be filled by domestic workers here in the United States.
And
so we advertise, we try to get these jobs filled and try to get the work done, but to be totally honest, people don't really want to work on the farm anymore. So especially out in Parma, that's not where your epicenter of people is. So
yeah.
The H-2A program has been an investment for us. It's not cheap.
How much, speaking of cheap, there's a lot of people that think it's just terrible that we're out here in agriculture where they think it's the old plantocracy system, and it's really not, because I can speak from experience that a lot of the farm workers I know in the dairy sector, they do quite well. Granted, they put in long hours, but they get housing in like $14 an hour to start. What are your people making?
So pretty similar to that. So we have to provide housing and transportation for them. And then we are paying it. I think they have it. I think the wage is still locked for right now. But like last year, it was like $13.62 in Idaho. And then we actually farmed some in Eastern Oregon as well. So over in Oregon, they were getting like 15 something. I'd have to look exactly.
So these workers are getting $13.60 to $15 an hour plus housing and transportation, and then they are working quite a bit because it's hard work. And take me to then late summer, fall, when it comes the bounty. We're gonna take these. What happens then?
Yeah, so harvest is definitely probably my favorite and least favorite time of year simultaneously. So I run our dryer, so I oversee that as part of harvest along, just like other farms, people wear a lot of hats. But basically what happens is we talked about the 18-foot tall bines. So on our farm, they go through and they cut the bottoms mechanically with, like, you could think of it a bit like scissor hands on the front of a tractor. And then as they go through and they cut the tops directly from the wire up in 18 feet, they fall into a truck that has kind of like a big side bed. You've seen these dump beds, things like that. It's kind of similar to that. And then they are transported to our stationary harvesting facility, where each vine is hung upside down and then goes through. We have what are called Donauer machines, which is, pretty standard. There's some other German types of machines. From that point, they are sorted from the leaves and stems. And I'm making this sound really simple. It's a lot more complicated than this.
That's like so much like, oh, well, we run the combine through there and we get soybeans. Like, oh, that's all there is to it. I'm like, well, actually, there's a hell of a lot more to it. But you know what? We'll just stick with that. I got you. So they go through these. You're taking this 18-foot thing that's in a hopper truck into your stationary. What is it called? The Donauer machine is a picking facility, a picking machine, essentially. So it's the cotton gin, it's the combine. It's an amazing piece of equipment, and it separates all that stuff, right?
Yes. And it's really amazing. If you ever wanting to see anything like that, we have some, I think on our video on our website, we have some footage of it. And I don't know, Anne might have some on the USA Hops website too. Washington Hop Commission as well. It's really amazing. It's just the engineering. And I mean, a lot of these were developed in the 60s, the basic, engineering of it. So we've modernized it some, but it's pretty neat. It's really something to see. Yeah, but from the picker is what we call them, the picker. They are taken to the dryer via conveyor belts and are dried, depending on the farm, from, I would say, 6 to 14 hours. The art of drying is something that is I feel like can really make or break the farm, because you have to essentially, you're targeting that 8.5 to 10.5 or 8 to 10 mark of moisture, and maybe they're coming in at 75% moisture.
Yeah.
So you have to really manage fans and heat, and it's really a complex thing.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, they get baled. And that way we're taking this, now it's a dried product, and then we're baling it just like a bale of hay. But does that happen at your place, or do they go somewhere else?
So it happens at our place. I will back you up though. There's a very important step in between the dryer and the baler, and that is cooling. Cooling the pile. So basically, just similar to hay, if you're baling wet bales, you could have fires. Hops are a similar sense in that way, just because of the oil complexity that the cones have within them. And cooling is something that we try to cool between, I would say, 18 and 24 hours is normally standard on our farm. But in order to do that, you need space, right? So you've got huge, essentially, piles of hops that are just sitting there, that are cooling and homogenizing, because the room is different. It's not, it's not a German style where it's a continuous dryer. So you've maybe got a little bit of wetter spots here, or some drier spots here, and it helps even them out to make the.
So are we doing that? Are we doing that outside on a slab of concrete? Are we doing that in a barn?
That's in the barn.
Okay.
A very safe barn.
A very big barn, and we're using a payloader to turn the pile to, because we've all eaten, eat around the edge because it's cooler there. Is that what we're doing, or is that what's happening?
So for us, we don't disturb them once they're in the pile until we go to bale them. We let them just, because they are such a delicate flour, we really try to maintain the integrity of the cone. So we just let them cool, and then we scoop them and place them essentially in kind of like a big hole in the floor, and they go up conveyors and into the bale box.
Okay. They get put into a bale. Bale is how big?
On our farm, we're the standard American bale, which is 200 pounds.
200-pound bale. From there, they go to, and if you're watching this, and I encourage you to watch this one, because Ann has changed her backdrop a couple of times. She's now showing us a bale. It looks like it's a great big rectangle in a burlap sort of wrapping. Then they go from there to a further processor that pelletizes them. Is that right?
Yeah, typically then at that point, they are taken to cold storage. And then the processor will then take them to pellets, and there is one stage further, they can go into extract as well. So that's kind of the alpha aroma difference there.
And the average brewer, whether it's Anheuser-Busch or Joe and Bob's microbrew down the street, they get this product typically as a pellet because it's more stable, it's easier for them to handle. Am I right?
Craft beer is definitely committed to the pellet, and the Anheuser-Busch as well as a lot of brewers. It's predominantly how hops are used, but extract has been used for a very long time. Anne would probably know how long they've been using extract.
Oh, Anne doesn't need to tell us that necessarily. What she needs to tell us is, more importantly, they're not all the same hops. My favorite beer of all time, Coors Banquet, got it in the kegerator. Also, I like a microbrew once in a while. I like an IPA. I like a Christmas ale. Different hops, along with other things, change the flavor. So is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct. And essentially, all of the different hop varieties fall within two classes. We'll refer to them either as aroma hops, which tend to be lower in alpha acid content, which is the bittering substance that gives beer its base bittering flavor or bitter flavor. And then the bitter or alpha hops, and those are grown specifically for the production of that alpha acid. So your average alpha acid hop would be producing something in the range of 16 to 20% alpha content, which goes back to Michelle's comment about making sure that those bales are dry, because you have not only a compacted crop like you would with a bale of hay, but now you add 15 to 20% oil and resin to that crop, and then that really increases the flammability. So we're very careful about the drying of these cones, because of the fact that not only can they self-heat from moisture, but once that starts, you've got a very flammable product that's got up to 20% oils and resins in its content. So within those two classes of hops, we probably produce, I would say that our top 10 varieties make up about 50 to 60% of our acreage, but overall we produce over 60 different varieties in the US. And there's over 100 different varieties worldwide. Every one of those varieties has its own unique flavor profile and aroma profile. So
let's talk
yes,
about,
you've got quite a bit of variability.
we are, after all, the business of agriculture. Let's talk about some business things here. And again, I know, dear listener and viewer, this is a longer episode than usual, but it's the best subject I have covered in a while here. I've got to tell you, man, because, you know, if you like a good cold beer at the end of the day, this is our episode. And I should also remind you, you know, I've been saying it for years. If you eat it, drink it, or smoke it, agriculture produced it, right? So we're talking about the drink side of agriculture. If you want to change out a field, this is a long-term thing, you know, putting those rhizomes in the ground, et cetera. So I'm assuming, Michelle, you've got a contract and a brewery or a brokerage says you're going to get paid to grow this stuff. It's not just like, hey, we decide we just go ahead and throw this kind of hops out there. And what do you think? Anybody want it? Tell me how the whole business part of it works.
Yeah, so contracting is something that we've always encouraged with brewers. Obviously, there's things like COVID in 2020 that kind of throw curveballs into the whole business of everyone. But historically, what we've done on our farm is we try to be in a more heavily contracted position. So you can grow hops on the open market. That's just something that is a little bit riskier, and we're a little bit more conservative, I would say, on our farm. So we try to be fully contracted every year. And if, you know, something does better than normally average, then that's great. And we've got some extras. But it also can be a little bit complicated because there are proprietary varieties. So that's just a little thing that I'll throw in there without going too far down that rabbit hole. But for us, I would say our average contracts are anywhere from 2 to 4 years. And my sister, Diane, that's really her bread and butter on our farm. She manages all the sales and has done so for the better part of a decade now. And
What's your role?
My role, I'm the COO. So I do all the stuff Diane doesn't want to pretty much.
All right. So you're about the production and the operation and all the moving parts. She's about the money and the biz, right? Then you got a third sibling. What's the third sibling's role?
So our youngest sister, Andrea, just came back, and she is managing more on the marketing side right now. And she's kind of overseeing our new endeavor with our farm stand.
Ah, good deal. All right. So how many different varieties do you grow?
So we grow 14 different varieties on our farm.
And your customers are?
So we have, I would say, a mix. So we do some small dealers. You know, you're looking at people that are maybe in Canada or Montana. We use all different sizes. So you got small, mid, and large dealers. Large dealers, you're looking at Hopsteiner or SS Steiner. You're looking at Barth Haas Group and Yakima Chief ranches, I would say.
But none of your stuff goes directly with a contract to, Miller Brewing or something like this, no?
We do have some direct contracts. So we work closely with Founders Brewing out of Michigan. And then we also work with Anheuser-Busch.
Okay, got it.
And then we do smaller stuff too, and talked about the wet hops. So we'll do wet hops with our local breweries near Boise. And then we'll do, some direct contracts with those guys as well.
All right. So we've been on a while. We've covered a lot of ground, and there's probably a couple things I'm missing. And what thing am I missing that somebody needs to know that we didn't talk about?
Well, I'll just throw out a few fun facts here. And
I love it.
Let's go back. First, we were talking a little bit about the economics. So about every 5 years, we do an enterprise budget with Washington State University. Just last week, I got the document that we created with input from our Hop Growers of America Board of Directors in 2020. And according to that particular cost study, the current total cost of producing hops in the Pacific Northwest is a little over $13,000 an acre. Now, that's an annual operating cost. That not only includes your cash costs, however, that does also include your amortization of your land and your plant and equipment. So that is kind of the figure that our growers need to be looking at long term to be able to have a successful operation. On a short-term basis, they may be able to take a little lower price or take different prices on their different varieties, because you need to make sure you have a very robust mix of varieties, as Michelle said, because you don't want to be growing the entire farm on one variety that has to be harvested on September 10th. You need to start harvest the last week of August and go through the first week of October. So you need a variable group of maturities. So anyway, our growers are going to be keying in on that figure. And again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, with an average yield of 2,000 pounds to the acre, that gives you a pretty good idea of what our growers need to look at as a break-even cost for long-term success in this industry. Most of our growers are 3rd to 7th generation. And, we talked about the $6 million investment in a new picking machine. Some of our bigger operations are looking at more like $12 to $20 million for an investment in their harvesting facilities. And you can't do that overnight. So most of our growers are using, as Michelle mentioned, they're using picking facilities that originally were built in the 1960s. And over the years, they've replaced this piece in one year, and another year they've upgraded that piece, and a year later they might do a piece over in the back. And so there's a continual improvement of these facilities. And, you really oftentimes don't get a new one unless something catastrophic happens and you burn down the old one. So unfortunately, that's just the reality of the business. Going back to talking a little bit about some of Michelle's discussion of our spring activities, I think one fun fact is that we talked about the twining, the putting of the twine in the ground every year and tying it to the trellis at 18 feet tall. So just doing a really quick calculation on 60,000 acres of hops, let's just say on average, there are 3 strings per hill, 889 hills per acre. And if you do the math on that, that works out to about almost 620,000 miles of core COIR twine, which is made from coconut husks, or some growers use a paper twine, basically a twisted craft paper twine. So we're putting in about 620,000 miles of twine each year. And as Michelle mentioned, that's all done by hand. It's tied to the trellis at the top by hand. It's punched into the ground, into the hill by hand. So
you said 100, how many miles just per acre?
Well, I didn't actually break it down per acre,
okay, but you're talking about a hell of a lot of miles of the twine per acre. And by the way, how many employees during your busy season, Michelle, how many employees are out there covering that 1,000 acres?
For us, we cap out typically at around 120.
120, that's labor. And then does that also include, I'm sure you've got a couple of just people that are there year round because keeping the machines going, et cetera. Well, then what's your full-time?
Full-time people, we have about 30.
30 full-time people and then 120 laborers?
Yeah, total.
So you got 150 people, not mentioning the office staff, which is your money-hungry sister, and then the little one, which, let's face it, youngest usually don't do anything. I mean, let's face it, I'm kidding. Of course, I'm the youngest. I did everything. But so 120 workers, 30 people that are there year-round. You got a lot of stuff going on. Can I ask you a question, Michelle? Did you make money last year? Did you break even, or did you lose money at Gooding Farms?
Well, so there's a few ways to look at it. I would say everything, whole picture, we broke even. If you took away the assistance, we lost money.
Yeah, if it hadn't been for CFAP 2, you'd have lost money.
The PPP and the insurance claim that we're working through right now. I mean, it was a rough year. It was really hard.
How's 2021 look for you?
It looks good. I think we are in a good position on the sales side. Diane's done a good job there. And regenerative ag is starting to show the perks there. So we're pretty excited about that.
That's good. Eternal optimism. That's why you're in the business of agriculture. Last thought then, Ann, anything that we need? First off, if anybody wants to learn more about this than they learned on our podcast, they can go to your website, and that is
usahops.org. And we do have videos. We have just a wealth of information on the website for people who are interested in learning more about hops.
I think this is just a neat thing for me. And if they want to find out more about Gooding Farms there, and what is it, Parma, Idaho?
Yep, Parma.
Okay, if we want to, what's that?
Goodingfarms.com.
Goodingfarms.com. And, back when I used to travel for my business, which I think is going to happen again come summer, I work in Idaho sometimes, so I'm intrigued. Maybe we'll have to swing by and see what's going on there. So you got hopsusa.org or Gooding Farms.
Right? usahops.org.
usahops.org or goodingfarms.com. This has been a fascinating topic. I really enjoy it. I will remind everybody that if you are in the hops industry and you are a hop grower, please consider checking us out. On January 21st, I'm going to be the keynote speaker, and I think I'm kicking off the entire online conference. Am I not?
You're going to be our Thursday morning keynote to kick off that day. Thanks to COVID, you would have been kicking off the whole conference, but we took heart on our attendees and we've spread it over 5 days instead of a couple, so that we don't have to have 12 hours of Zoom programming each day. Yes. And so you're actually going to be on the third day of the conference.
Okay, so I'll be on Thursday, the January 21st in the morning, and I would like you to be there. I would love for you to hear my message. I'll be talking about big picture business of agriculture stuff, trends, outlook, consumer issues, and other items that are impacting the industry of food, fuel, and fiber. Michelle, Ann, you're awesome. I got to tell my listeners real quickly that this episode was brought to you by Harvest Profit. Go to harvestprofit.com for a software solution that will make your agricultural enterprise more profitable. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You know what? I think I speak for everybody that's just enjoyed this podcast. All this talk about hops made me thirsty for a Coors Banquet. All right. Thanks for being here. Until next time, it's the Business of Agriculture.
The Business of Agriculture podcast is brought to you by the Georgia Agricultural Commodity Commission for Milk, reminding you that energy drinks are chock full of caffeine and sodium, soft drinks and juices are loaded with sugar. What are you feeding your family? Make it milk.